Welcome. Towards the front. It's going to feel a lot more intimate in this huge room. I am Jane Dutton. It's an absolute honor to introduce my wonderful colleague, Bob Quinn. His official title is the Margaret Elliott Tracy Professor of Management at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. But his unofficial titles include Masterful Change Agent, Creative Researcher, Wonderful Colleague, and Terrific Dad. I'm going to give you 4 adjectives that came to mind when I thought about introducing him. He's courageous, audacious, integrative, and deeply inspiring. You will see that. I've been lucky to have been his colleague for the last 25 years, and together with Kim Cameron and Bob and I, we're co-founders of the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan. He's best known for his work in change, leadership, and effectiveness. At this point, he's done a bunch of traditional research in our top journals, but also the author or co-author of 18 different books, including, I'm just listing some of my favorites, Lift, Deep Change, Becoming a Master Manager, Change the World, Building the Bridge as You Walk on It. And his book, actually last year, called Best Teacher in You, won the Ben Franklin Award for the best book in education. So he took this little sidetrack into the world of education and really did a top-selling book. He has a new book called The Positive Organization, Breaking Free of Conventional Cultures, Constraints, and Beliefs. He's truly wonderful. You will see that. Today he's going to talk to us about turning organizations positive, an invitation to cultural surgery. Bob.
Thank you, Jane. Jane's getting better and better. About 20 years ago, she introduced me at the Academy of Management one day, and she was getting very excited. And she said, oh, Bob's a wonderful guy. He became our department chair, and 3 women got pregnant. And she walked off the stage. So I had to assure people there was no causal relationship in her variables. So thank you very much, James. I'm delighted to have her introduce me, delighted to be associated with my colleagues, Kim Cameron, who's here, Ryan Quinn, who is here, and I thought I saw Chris White someplace from the center. These are wonderful, wonderful people. Today, let's see, are we working on the slides? There we go. Let's go back. Yeah. Okay, so what I'd like to focus on today with you is the notion of turning organizations positive. And I would particularly like to come at this with applying all this positive science that we get here and elsewhere to the process of making a difference in organizations. And I'd like to do 4 things with you. I want to share a metaphor with you. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about leadership. In that last session, my breath was taken away by one of his facts when he listed activities at work, and the very last thing on the list is talk to my boss. And then activities in life, the last one's cleaning house. And cleaning house is way higher than talking to my boss, right? That's kind of funny, but what does it say? What are the implications of that fact about the nature of life in organizations? I think it has profound implications. I'd like to talk a little bit about leadership, about organization, and then I'd like to take you into a trip deep into the heart of darkness. We need a little of that after all this positivity we've had. And I want to see how you do in the heart of darkness, okay? So that's where we'll go. So let me start with this story. It comes from a talk that I heard recently that really resonated with me. I think it's very powerful. And the story is about a man on an Indian reservation who's a doctor. An old man comes to his office. He says, "What's your problem? How can I help you?" And the man doesn't talk. So the doctor gets a little frustrated. He says, "I can't help you unless you talk." And finally the Indian man says, "Do you know how to dance?" And the doctor doesn't know how to respond at first, and then realizes, I bet that this is one of the medicine men who heals through dancing and music. So the doctor thought deeply and then came up with a brilliant strategy. He said, "Can you teach me to dance?" And the old man said, "I can teach you to dance, but you have to hear the music." Now, I think that is extremely powerful. I'm going to return to it a number of times, and as I do, I hope you start to see the power of this metaphor and how it connects to everything I think is happening at this conference. We see the surface things. That tree, part of that yin and yang, is easy to see. The root system is very, very hard to think about because it's under the ground. I think that in organizations we pay enormous attention to the dance and almost none to the music. And I'm going to try to share with you what I think the music is as we go on this morning. And I'd like to start with this slide. I call this my $110,000 slide. If you look at that statement, if leaders cannot change individuals' mental maps, they'll not change the destinations people pursue or the paths they take to get there. I think that's an incredibly important statement. And it explains much of the condition of what happens in organizations, including those facts we just thought about. Because I believe managers do not know how to do that. And behavior does not change in organizations very well. And Drucker's statement comes into play here. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. When I put that statement up in front of executives, they always laugh, but it's a painful laugh. Because what does a manager do all day long? They sit in meetings and solve problems. They think about, how do we solve this? Let's do this. They generate strategies. Kim Cameron's done extensive work on how often organization change fails. His numbers are staggering. How can it be that organization change fails so much and we never learn how to do it differently? How can that be? Because we're talking about billions of dollars. It's baffling. There's many baffling things, I think, in organizations. So today, I'm thinking not about let's move the bottle of water from this side of the table to this side of the table and call it an improvement. I'm talking about deep change or transformative learning. When we see the world in a different way, and therefore we behave in a different way. When I think about it, and this is very tied to the opening talk after the first talk on the opening night that we heard, when we look through the positive lens, be it a research lens or otherwise, we see something very different than when we look through the normal lens. When a social scientist does normal social science research, they're asking the question, what is it? They gather data, they analyze it, and say, here's the pattern. That's it. What positive psychology and positive organization scholarship's about is a bias. We move the lens over to the right and say, what does it look like now? What does a great organization or a great team or a great person look like? That changes the reality that we see. Now, it has big implications, and here's sort of a key point. I'd like you to look at this list very carefully. People make utilitarian assumptions. They act with self-interest. They minimize personal costs, engage in conflict, become alienated, fail to learn, react to constraints, comply with demands, prefer the status quo, and so forth. What's your reaction to that list? What do you see? Someone, I'm looking for an answer here. How do you react to this list? What's your feeling? Yes, ma'am. What a terrible statement! She says, this is what I see when I go into organizations. These are common beliefs. Well, she's exactly right. This is social science. What's the first thing an economist is going to tell you? People are self-interested. Resources are scarce. Conflict is natural. So we go across political science, psychology, sociology, etc. We do hundreds of thousands of studies, come back, and this is what we generate. Because this is real. This is what she experiences. Now, this is also what you and I believe. Oh, I saw a head said, not me, I'm a positive psychologist. I believe this is what you and I believe. From the time we learned to talk, we were trained to believe this. When you were in the playground at 3 years old and someone said, let's play Army, you raised your hand and said, I'll be the private. Is that what you said? Oh, I'm getting another no over here. You said what? I'll be the general. I'll be the mother. I'll be the father if we play house, whatever it is, right? You knew at 3 years old it's better to be on top of a hierarchy than on the bottom. And all these other things as well. Then you went to college. In every class you took, these were the unspoken assumptions underneath those classes. Then you went to work. And these, as she says, are the assumptions we find operating work. Now, if you're a manager and you make these assumptions, what happens next? Looking for a hand again. Yeah. They come true. They're self-fulfilling. What I believe, I enact in my world then emerges. This is a very self-sealing process. This is reality, and it gets replicated because that's what we believe. So what's this list? Sacrifice for the common good, show compassion, spontaneous contributions, build social networks, live in high-quality connections, experiment, feedback, learning, expand roles, craft jobs, etc. Do you see a contrast? When we look at positive organizations, these are the things we tend to find. Now, when I put that up in front of a bunch of executives, what's their first reaction? Pollyanna! Right? This is offensive. Now, that's a big claim. Why would this make people uncomfortable? If you're a positive psychologist and you go places and you say things to people, they get offended by some of the things you say. And people give a lot of explanations for that. I believe the explanation is pain. They look at that and it causes pain for a number of reasons. The second list is also reality. When you go out and do science, looking through the positive lens, this is what you find. It's a new set of assumptions, right? It's also real. It's much less frequently seen than the first list, but it is real. Now, because they're written as opposites intentionally, people say it's either or. One of the major points I want to make today is that that's wrong. That it's both and. The first list never goes away. And the second list is a very important thing about it. How do you turn the list on the left into the list on the right? If you have that list, if you have that left organization, how do you turn it into the organization on the right? I believe, yes, sir. Somehow I've got to change back to the mindsets, right? The mental maps. I've got to somehow change the mental maps. I believe the second law of thermodynamics gets reflected here. I believe organizing is vulnerable. It's always breaking down. And unless work is done to the contrary, it keeps breaking down. And the question is, what is that work? And the answer is one word. That work is leadership. Not management, leadership. And I believe we very seldom see it. So the question is, where does the music come from? Now, where's Katie? There she is. Katie made me read an article last couple of weeks from the Handbook of Culture at the Oxford Handbook. And there was something in that article that impacted me a great deal. They suggested, after they reviewed the literature, that there was a value chain of organizational effectiveness. And this is the chain. They said it starts with leader values and goes to leader behavior. It then goes from leader behavior to organizational culture and then organizational climate. It then goes to employee engagement and employee performance. Now this is, I think, a very helpful concept. And if you look at it very carefully, the question is, where's the dance? Well, there's the dance. What do we do in organizations? Well, we have performance evaluations. We've got to have the right system. And then we counsel people and tell them how to improve their performance. Then we monitor them all day long. We measure their behavior. And we tell them how to behave. And right? We're always working on the dance. Where's the music? See, I think when they talk about values, I don't think they mean a list of values. You got the right values. I think what that really means is that you're living your values. That you're in a state of ever-increasing integrity, and you're full of something that the transformational leadership researchers call idealized influence. A well-established empirical concept that we ought to talk a lot more about in this group, because it is so tied to everything we hear about here. But that music is a long way from the dance, and it violates Western thought. Western thought says leadership is about knowing and doing. So here's some research, leader. Now you know. Change the dance. That leaves out something that's extraordinarily, unbelievably important and absolutely ignored, and that is my state of being. My moral condition. Absolutely crucial. I remember interviewing Jack Welch on a TV thing, and I said, Jack, he was coming, his book had just come out. I said, Jack, what if someone accused you of loving the people at GE, would there be enough evidence to convict you? He said, yes, there would. And he gave a 5-minute answer about how he loved, and it was very convincing. I had no doubts about it. And then I said to him, Jack, if that's true, in this book where you list all these very sexy techniques that you used at General Electric, why in the book does it have not a single sentence that says, I love the people and they love me? Because I don't believe the techniques. I believe the techniques work because of the way the people feel about you. And sure enough, there was a person who took all his techniques, tried to imply them at a Fortune 500 company, and the CEO got fired. Because none of those techniques worked there. The condition of the leader is of enormous consequence. So I want to look at 2 tools for changing the music. The first is a book that I did with Ryan called Lift, The Fundamental State of Leadership, and the second edition is coming out this month. We did the second edition because we've had so many profound experiences with our students since doing the book, and we wanted to put those in because they were so important to us. The second is this book that's coming out in August, And I want to draw from both of them because they complement each other as we think about changing the dance. So what's in the first book? Basically, we suggest that there's something called the normal state. Go back to the middle of the curve. And you and I default to it all the time. So it's not unusual for me to be comfort-centered. You ask me to help you and it's in my skill set, I'm usually there for you. But if you ask me to do something I don't know how to do, where I might get embarrassed, I get very slippery. We need a volunteer. How about you? Would you like to volunteer? Come on up here. What's your name? Rotem, okay. Now all I want you to do is a simple task. Look at these people and give me one word that you think describes them.
Enthusiastic.
Enthusiastic, good. Now sing to them.
Sing?
No, just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. Thank you, thank you. Appreciate it. What did I just do to that poor woman? She's sitting in her comfort zone, minding her own business, and I say, sing to these people. If she did that to me, I would be horrified. You know why? My musical IQ is not 0, it's minus 100, all right? I never got that do-re-mi thing down, all right? And I would be back in my seat so fast, you'd hardly see me, right? I think we all do that. We spend a lot of time tied to our comfort zone. I spend a lot of time being externally directed. What will they think of me? What would the boss say? If I bought this, what will the neighbors say? I got to give a talk. This is terrifying. What will they think of me, right? I spend a lot of time being externally directed. If I didn't, I couldn't function. On the other hand, there's a tipping point, and it's very easy to no longer know who I am. I believe we all do that. It's very easy for me to be self-focused, to take care of myself. And finally, it's very easy for me to be internally closed. I go through life saying, give me feedback. How's this going? Right? Give me feedback. How's this going? What am I really saying? Now catch it again. Give me feedback. How's this going? That's exactly right. She just yelled out, tell me how good I am. How'd you know that? Where are you? Who said it? Okay, how did you know that? Okay. And I sent a very powerful message. I said, give me some feedback. Give me some feedback. This is 10%, this is 90%. And we are signaling to the world often, don't give me feedback. And feedback is a key of growth, the breakfast of champions, right? And I cut myself off from it all the time. So that's the normal state. Here's a different concept, the fundamental state of leadership. Now here's something crucial. It's in the title and I want to work backwards. Leadership. We say, she's our dean, she's our leader. He's our president, he's our leader. You talk like that? I talk like that. When we say sentences like that, there are implicit assumptions. What are they? Okay. I've heard several answers. One is, if they're the leader, then I'm not a leader. I'm automatically the follower, right? What makes that person the leader? They hold a position. We equate leadership with hierarchy, which is fundamentally biased away from change. Now, for the next few minutes, I want you to try another pair of glasses on. Leadership is not position. Many people hold positions and they have no idea how to lead. It's not position, it's influence. Who has influence? Everybody. The janitor has influence, right? Everybody has it. Now, state as opposed to trait, meaning dynamic. I believe your influence, my influence looks like this. It looks like an EKG, not like this. One of you is sitting there quiet in the audience, hasn't said a thing, hasn't done a thing. Your influence right now is a 1. But if you raise your hand in about 60 seconds and say something profound, what happens? It just shot up to a 7 or 8. So this influence is not a fixed thing, it's a dynamic process. When you make those two changes, you are making a dramatic shift in the assumptions you and I make about this thing called leadership. Very dramatic shift. Third word, fundamental. The foundation stone, the base, the origin. And here's what I think that leads to. It is possible for you and I to move from being comfort-centered to being result-centered. That is, you and I can become purposeful. Most of the time, most people are not. We've had a lot of data in this conference that suggests that. I can become internally directed instead of externally directed. I can clarify my values. I can become more authentic when I do. In other words, my integrity goes up. My authenticity goes up. And Pentland's incredible research at MIT about authenticity is just mind-blowing. The influence of authenticity. I can go from being self-focused to being other-focused, from being internally closed to being externally open. Now, what's that one mean? Externally open. It means this to me. I've got 4 stars on my shoulder. It says I'm the general. I can do this, right, with this sitting lieutenant and put my eyeballs on the same level as his eyeballs. And I can relate to this lieutenant in such a way that I make it possible for him to tell me the truth, which is normally impossible. In hierarchies, truth does not speak to power. Not only can I help him tell me the truth, we can now co-create the emerging future together. We can learn our way into the future together. Do I still have the stars on my shoulder? Yeah. But that authority is latent as this relationship, emergent relationship, comes to the fore. I can become result-centered, internally directed, other-focused, and externally open. There are 4 questions. I often say this is the simplest model in the history of leadership. If you look closely, there's no arrows up there. No independent variable, no dependent variable. 4 questions. What result do I want to create? Comes from Robert Fritz, who spent his whole life on that question and the power of it and how it takes us off the path of least resistance, takes us out of the comfort zone. When we clarify our purpose, we change. We go here from here. We have a lot of research again this last 2 days on intention. Am I internally directed? People say, Quinn, I got it. Result-centered, internally. Boy, do I feel strong. I'm going to go tell my boss just what I think of her. And I said, well, that's good. Are you other-focused? Do you understand your boss's deepest needs and interests? Do you love her? Whoa, I don't even want to talk to her, the data says. It's really intriguing. In this study we did of the teachers, these were highly effective teachers, top 1% state of Ohio. They walked on water. Most inspiring interviews I've ever done. These common-looking people who are just masters of their trade. Nothing was conventional about them. And they'd say things like, I went to the ed school. They taught me how to teach. I went to my first day of class, and whoa, there were 30 faces looking at me, everyone unique. And I knew to be a good teacher, I had to learn the needs and interests of every one of those kids. So I did that work, and I became a good teacher. I'm writing this down, I'm impressed. And she says, and then I went to the next level. I said, what? What do you mean you went to the next level? She said, well, then I learned every kid's the same. No matter what they say or do, comma, crucial piece, no matter what they say or do, every kid wants to be successful. Every kid wants to be respected and loved. When you break that code, she says, you can teach anyone, gifted, special ed, old, young, doesn't matter. I have an entrepreneur friend that said, yeah, she scaled empathy. Do you see the evolution of mastery there? You have a different worldview when you do that. Another one said, well, one of the normal teachers said, I respect these kids as long as they deserve it. See, that's basic exchange theory. That's transaction. We all know that. That's part of what we learn all these decades of our life. This highly effective teacher said, when a kid's disrespectful, I correct them immediately, while modeling total positive regard for the child. Comma. I wish I could remember to do it at home. Do you see the work that's going on? And am I externally open? Am I doing what et cetera, et cetera? Am I with these people in an equal relationship where we're co-creating together? When I put those 4 questions together, you see I'm now high on purpose, high on authenticity, high on empathy, and high on humility, strong humility. I'm now a more complex adaptive system. As David Bright talked about yesterday, I am more virtuous. I am a system of virtue. Going back to the research on transformational leadership, I have idealized influence. Not authority, not position, idealized influence. People listen to me because I put the common good ahead of my personal good. They listen to me because they know they can trust me, et cetera, et cetera. Entirely different world state. Now, the argument that Ryan and I make in the teaching that we do is we spend the first hour of the semester teaching them this concept and say, that's it, semester's over. The rest of the semester, that's all the learning you're going to do. The rest of the semester is about you internalizing these questions, learning how to ask them in every situation. I'll just give you one exposure to that. This is an interesting list. It comes from that work with the students in class. They have an assignment. Every week, they have to identify something that's going to happen next week. These are the kinds of things they identify. When I put this in front of executives, I say, what is this? They say, that's my week next week. That's what I do all week. So I say, what are you going to do differently next week? Well, why would I do anything differently? Now, here's the claim. The moment you learn how to really ask these questions of yourself around any one of those things, you become more conscious or mindful. New strategies immediately emerge. We now have hundreds of cases of this that you can try, and if you do, you will create a positive variation of yourself. Your best self will emerge, your learning self. If you then reflect on that in one paragraph of writing, your learning will skyrocket. Now, the research says going to a workshop on leadership is actually positively correlated with leadership development, but the relationship, while significant, is weak. The powerful relationship is having new experiences and reflecting on them. Most of the time, the great leadership jumps are from crisis. We have a personal life crisis which forces us to reflect on the new experience. Ryan and I argue, here's a method to create a series. Remember that last talk? when he talked about those daily positive events. So imagine you're now having regular, new, positive events and reflecting on them. These kids finish the semester and they say, I'm changing my major. I'm going to get married. I'm going to get divorced. They make big decisions. They redefine who they are. So, the first argument is we can self-elevate. And we can go, in times of crisis even, when we have a very narrow attention span, to opening up and becoming strong and positive in a very difficult situation and come up with new solutions and new strategies. Now, I want to go to pop over to the organization side for a minute. I have a good friend, he's a world-class economist, and I went away for 3 years to Australia and spent 3 years in Adelaide, Australia, building an organization. When I came back, it was probably the best experience of my life. When I came back, people say, hey, you've been gone 3 years, how'd it go? And I start to tell them, they say, let me tell you about my new car. The one exception was this guy who sat me down and for 2 hours asked me questions about my experience. We were together because he was getting a major award that night. We're in this big fancy dinner. During the break, he runs across the room and says, we're going to write a paper. We're going to turn economics upside down. He said, before you leave tomorrow morning, we're going to meet. Well, we did. The paper got written. And basically, it's unreadable. It's all in math, Greek symbols. It's a model, a mathematical model of an organization that we then change by introducing higher purpose. And what happens is a huge transformation in the nature of the organization. The employees become owners. Now, what he carefully explained to me early on was that microeconomics is based on this model. The principal or the employer hires someone, says, I will give you these dollars, you do these things. The agent or the employee says, okay. And as long as you're there to measure and monitor what that person does, the contract tends to hold. But the moment you turn your back, it tends to fall off. And this problem is at the heart of microeconomics. And the reason he was so excited is that the model introduced a thought that's very foreign to economics. Not so foreign to you and I in this field, but very important in economics. He said, we have to now go interview CEOs. We've got to find high-purpose CEOs and interview them. This is so important. So I said, okay, let's go do that. So we went, we interviewed 25 CEOs, and that turned out to be very interesting. Half of them told us, this is what was shocking, half of them told us, when I took the position of CEO, I did not believe in purpose or culture or people. It was only through crisis that I discovered what you and I would call positive psychology. Now this was stunning to me. Now when they did learn it, it changed everything. And most CEOs don't learn it, or a lot of CEOs don't learn it. Now Peter Vail once wrote something that I think is very important for you and I to be aware of, because this is exactly my experience in 40 years of working with organizations. Peter said, the purpose of an organization has to be discovered. That word is incredibly important. That means it already exists. That is not the conventional view. The conventional view is, I, the CEO, have to be smart and announce the purpose. Peter says, it exists. The CEO has to go out and discover it. That violates convention. Peter said, it has to be articulated. And then it has to be acted upon. You see, today, because it's politically correct, most big companies have a purpose statement. It's in their annual report. The research shows 90% of them are hypocritical. They never use that purpose to make decisions. The employees automatically know that, so what have they done? By being politically correct, they've created positive harm. They've increased the level of cynicism in the organization. 10% live by the purpose, and it produces a very different outcome. That's fascinating. Finally, it has to be continually clarified. Continually is the key word. I have to embody the purpose. I have to be the purpose. In every conversation, I have to re-articulate the purpose. I have to connect every individual to the purpose because it's always breaking down. The CEO of one company said, that is my purpose to exist, is connect every person's job to the purpose of the organization. I have to do it every day, every conversation. That is not a believable proposition for most people in positions of authority. In fact, it's quite offensive. Peter said, most executives wish to absolve themselves of this notion of purpose. Why? Because you can't check it off and say, oh, I did that today. You have to be authentic. You have to know what it is, and you have to live it. And they don't even want to talk about it because they don't believe it, unless they go through that life crisis and suddenly understand the two lists that I showed you. Now, I would say, for those of you who want to be leaders, who teach classes, this is not bad news, it's great news. Because there's a golden opportunity here. If you can teach your students to do that, you've just given them a huge head start in life. Huge. Now, I want to tell you a story. In the book, most of the book in the front goes around these 6 arguments. Number 1, managers become, when they go through these changes, they become bilingual. We had a number of these CEOs say, once I learned this, I had all these engineers. I never go to those engineers and talk in these positive terms with them because they don't understand it and they would go crazy. It's my job to nurture them into another reality. So I have to be bilingual. I have to talk both languages. When I talk to my MBAs that go through this class that I teach at the end of the semester, I say, look, you are now different than every other MBA on the planet because you understand the second model. You did not lose the first. You will always have the problem-solving model inside you. But you can see things no one else can see. Therefore, you are more powerful and valuable because you have the positive lens. They become bilingual. They create purpose. They nurture authentic conversation. The dramatic cases of that. They help people see possibility. The huge mistake is, here's the possibility, and I'm going to tell you about it. And people just look at them. How do you create experiences that allow people to transform their own basic assumptions so they can see what's possible? I think that's a major issue for every person who attends this conference. If you're going to practice POS, positive psychology or POS in any way, do you have the ability to not tell them, but help them discover their way into the positive lens? You see, scientists stand up at places like this and put up slides. Say, here's the information. It's the same thing your school teacher did in the 4th grade. It doesn't create engagement. You look out the window and you dream about the World Series or whatever it is you dream about. Embracing the common good. Going from my self-interest, when I get a group of people to give up their self-interest to embrace the positive, the common good, I've created an organization. Until I haven't. Because there's a building with a name and people in it doesn't mean there's an organization. And then finally, do I know how to stimulate and trust the emergent process? That's the hardest one of all. And the word trust means belief. Leadership is about creating belief. You can go to a theology school and you can't find a class on how to create belief, much less a business school. That's what it's about. seeing the possible future and pursuing it. Do I know how to do that? Let's see, where am I here? So, I'd like you to keep these 6 things in mind. I'm going to tell you a story. You might even take notes on this story. It's so crazy. Because I'd like you to look for those things in this story. Now, here's the story. I have a good friend named Kim Cameron. Now, my mother always said, be careful who you hang around with. I bet your mother's told you that too. I should have listened. Kim Cameron always gets me in trouble. One of the reasons is he has a one-word vocabulary. The word is yes. Kim, would you like to jump off this roof? Oh, yes, he says, right? Now, the consequence of that is we end up in very strange places. And I go along because someone has to carry his dead body home to his poor wife that's sitting over there. Well, the most recent version of this is he gets a phone call from a school district in a city that if I said the name, you'd go, oh, right? An inner city school district that is bankrupt, has no hope of ever getting out of that, of paying that money back. They're on their 4th emergency manager. The kids are at 4% proficiency in science, and it goes up to about 26, and there's one that's higher. If you examine this place, you'd say this is the pit of the world, right? It's hard to believe this is happening in the United States. So they say, Kim Cameron, could you come here and save us by teaching us positive organization scholarship? Oh, yes, I could do that. All of his colleagues scattered. No one wanted to even talk to him. I knew I had to carry the body home, so I went with him. They say, well, we'd like you to do a 2.5-day session with us. Oh, by the way, we got 90 principals meeting in a day or two. Would you also talk to them and work with them? So we go into this place, 90 principals. The emergency manager stands up and he gives a little speech for 10 minutes, which I thought was quite powerful. And when he was done, the applause went like this. The ever-astute Kim Cameron leans over and says, these people don't believe. I said, no kidding, right? So I stand up, I introduce him, he stands up, and he presents his science, right, of positive psychology and positive organization scholarship, which I've seen him do 1,000 times. And he's magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. And these people who look like they're ready to eat anybody who stood up there start leaning in. And they're on the edge of their seats. And I'm saying, whoa, what's going on here? And the answer is, these are people in the desert. And this man's claiming to have water. And they're leaning in. And he gives them a little assignment, and they talk. And I'm standing up on a stairway above them, and I'm listening carefully. And these people begin to talk, and my eyes water. I call them truth tears, the kind of tears I get when I have a spiritual experience. And this was a deeply spiritual experience. Because I could read the souls of these people. And I immediately said, I want to be here. I want to be with these people. These are magnificent human beings. So he finished. He said, come on up. I stood up. I told them how I felt about them. They were a little shocked by that. Then I shocked them some more. I said, I've come naked. I have no PowerPoint slides. I have no prepared remarks. I have nothing except a set of questions I want to ask you. So I asked some questions. They began to talk to each other, and then we talked as a collective. It was stunning. It was shocking how well this went. And then this woman raised her hand. And Kim had showed him a slide about heartbeats. Man, she was so upset. And she said, I'm going to tell you like it is. I'm going to tell you what it really means to be a school principal in this city. And people saying, yes, sister, tell it like it is. And they were all yelling. And And she talked about the collapse of the city and the school district and that principals were scapegoats. And she went on, quite explosive. And when she was done, every eye looked at me. And I simply said, why? She said, what? Why what? I said, why do you do it? Why do you get up every morning and do this? She said, because that's what I signed up for. I said, no, that's not the right answer. Wrong. Boy, the room was about to explode. Dead silence. And the guy over here says, the kids. You do it for the kids. Now keep looking at that list up there. We wrapped up. Another great moment. One of the administrators who brought us in says to Kim, wow, that was way better than what I expected. I didn't think it'd be this important. Now we could spend an hour on that. What was he thinking? What was he expecting? I think we could articulate that. And it has a huge message about the nature of organization and the hopelessness of them. So I'm walking out, and I happen to be next to the same woman who was so explosive. She's still upset, but she's pretty open. We're having this chat. She's talking about being a scapegoat. We get to the bottom of the stairs, and I said something which I don't even remember, a statement about positive leadership, and she froze in her tracks. And she had an epiphany in real time. And she said, whoa, maybe I'm supposed to be the scapegoat in order to bring off this transformation. And her body changed. Keep looking at the list. She hugged me, I hugged her, she walked, I didn't even catch her name. A week went by, and now we're at the main event. 90 top people, 5, including 25 principals, from this district. The first 3 emergency managers never assembled these people, never talked to them. Now they're in a room. And Kim starts taking them through that stuff again. And the conversation turns engaged. And again, magnificent job he does with these people. So then it's my turn, and I start a conversation. And a woman says, I feel like an abused wife, and my husband is the school district. Whoa, electrifies the room. Hand immediately goes up. That's right, says another one. I know a lot of women who are abused. And there's a subset of them that they stay where they are so the kids don't get beat up. And that's why I stay at my school. So the kids don't get punished more. Another hand shoots up. Yes, and that raises a very basic question. Can people who've been abused for 10 years be part of the transformation of a system? What's happening? Do we cut this off? No. We keep bringing it out. Something starts to happen. We go to lunch. One of them stops us. She said, thank you. I said, for what? She said, I didn't think this was possible. What? She said, this is a huge exercise in forgiveness and reconciliation. You know, think Mandela. We go back that afternoon. We continue the conversation. The question comes up, well, here's these administrators coming in, you know, why would we trust them? So we throw that into it, and we go back to the abuse questions. I say, now you answer the questions. We start talking about them. One of the women raises her hand. She said, I've got the answer. Everybody looked at her. She said, yes, we're going to trust them. Everybody's thinking, why would we do that? Answer, because we have no choice. We can't afford to lose another generation of kids. Keep looking at that list. Magic starts to happen. The emergency manager stands up and says, I've had a thought. I've been very moved by this. It seems to me what I need to do is to have the 90 of you be my transition team, my transformation team. Every policy we do, we're going to run through you. We're going to ask you to do the work. Every hand goes up saying they would participate. I asked them to write a final statement about what price they're willing to pay to move into this future. I didn't see it for 2 days, but more intense commitment than I've ever seen any other group produce. Do you see what's happening in that story? If we can go into the darkest pit in the United States and have that kind of a transformation, basically we were leading for 2 days that organization and taking it to a new place. If we can do that there, why can't we do it in every organization in the world? You see, at the heart of that inner city, there was music playing. Magnificent human beings who were totally abused, who got up every day because they had a purpose. They suffered without much hope because they had a purpose. They were autotelic, in Csikszentmihalyi's language. And when you find that music and you start to elevate it, the dance changes. Someone said, "Can we please take a picture?" To me, this is a magical picture. You know, sitting there in the very front is the emergency manager, the man who was outside just 2 days before. And now they're following him. Now, do we know if they'll succeed? Will the 4% go to 5% in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months? I have no idea, because there's enormous work still to be done, which may fail. But we opened the door. I heard people criticizing Cooperrider afterwards, saying, yeah, those big meetings, but what were the outcomes? You know, how many wars stopped? That's okay. That's a fair criticism. But we can start the process. We can then help people keep going. By being here, by doing the things you do, the things you learn, sharing the knowledge you have, we're building the tools to literally change the world. But the music and the dance are two different things. The dance is way out here. It's the behavior. The music's inside you. And when you answer those 4 questions and turn yourself into a more virtuous version of yourself, you dance to new music. Joseph Campbell said it this way: the hero returns from the dark night of the soul, empowered and empowering to the community. See, there's new music in you. And when you have that new music, you look at people, because you now love yourself, and you look at the people and what you've just been through, and you see potential in them they can't see in themselves. And now you can create conditions for them to realize that potential. Well, that's the big dose. I want to close with the last thing that's in that book. We call it the positive organization generator. It's almost the opposite of this. Kim and I teach a class that's probably the most potent class I've ever taught. We have these executives sit on the edge of their seats for 4 days. And then on Friday morning, I say to them, okay, what are you going to go home now and do differently? And this panicked look comes over them. Absolute panic. Now, they've had lots of ideas about positive psychology, positive organization scholarship. Lots of things were discussed. But they have a panicked look. And the question's why? Why can't they think of anything to do? I had all the wrong answers to that question for a long time. And then one day I had an epiphany. Very senior guy in a very serious job. He's watching something we presented, and he says, I got this idea for next week about that, and he starts to lay it out. And I see his voice fall off, and his head go down. And I glance up, and all his peers are looking at the ground. And that's when I had the epiphany. You see, you and I and them, there's no differences, are high school kids. We design our lives to avoid failure. And the biggest failure of all is to be embarrassed in that organization, because I know the culture. And it's almost always contrary to positive action. That was a big moment for me. And I immediately knew it wasn't their problem, it was my problem. I was responsible to do something about that. So we created something called the Positive Organization Generator. 100 practices from real organizations that are very radical. So they have to well, we do a lot of things that go with this, but they have to assess them about 4 seconds each. How interesting is this? And some of them are crazy, so they get 0. Some, they give it 7 or 8. In the end, they end up with a little pile of them that they're interested in. And then they have to reinvent them into something they're excited about, something they believe will work, and that they don't have to ask permission to implement. See, now they have a leader's agenda. They actually have to be helped because they're carrying so much fear. And so are you, and so am I. So organizational change, turning an organization positive, is not a superficial task. It's a task in deep change. We have to understand the dance, we have to understand the music, and we have to take responsibility to help them do what they can't do for themselves, to start the journey. My hope is that those notions will entice you to some new life experiments. When, for example, you internalize the 4 questions, they're very awkward. When you learn to ask them, you internalize them, you start to experience change. You can then use them to ask those same 4 questions to the other people. You can ask groups, and it's transformational every time once you learn how to do it. And it couldn't be simpler. But you've got to do it here first. I hope these things are helpful. I hope you can take and do something with them. I hope it helps you in your practice, in your research. I thank you very much and wish you the very best.